Salvador at President Nayib Bukele's militarization of parliament. Militia attacks forced thousands to flee their homes in the eastern DRC. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez in Quito, and this is from the South. We begin in El Salvador. There has been widespread indignation at Sunday's events when President Nayib Bukele sent soldiers into parliament. The president was trying to push lawmakers to vote for a $109 million loan intended to strengthen the country's security forces.
Criticisms of the military occupation of parliament, ordered by President Nayib Bukele, have come thick and fast from a range of citizen bodies.
I think this is the first important defeat for the government of President Bukele. There are now two alternatives. Either the president continues with his aggressive attitude of slandering and attacking people all the time, and that would only deepen the country's problems, or he learns the lesson, which is that he cannot lead an effective government which tackles the country's problems by breaking the constitutional rules.
After the Constitutional Court ruled that the president's call for an extraordinary session of parliament to approve his loan was unconstitutional and ordered him not to use the armed forces and the police in this way, members of the assembly also condemned his actions.
We have issued a strenuous condemnation of the fact, for example, that the police broke into the parliament's premises by breaking through the gates and jumping over walls. Then the army and the police and the president himself came into the chamber without being invited.
20 years after the peace accords were signed in El Salvador, the younger generation, who have grown up in democracy and peace, are alarmed by the government's actions.
Our people had to struggle for decades to rid themselves of terribly bloody military dictatorships. So we, as young people, have inherited that. And it is our duty to understand where our country came from, to know its history. The fact that we did not live through those atrocities doesn't mean we don't have to understand them.
Sunday's events continue to draw criticism at home and abroad. President Nayib Bukele says he will comply with the court's ruling, which forbids him from calling another such extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly.
The trial of 4 members of the Embassy Protection Collective started on Tuesday in Washington, D.C. They are accused of interfering with the protective functions of the U.S. Department of State. In April 2019, after the Venezuelan government recalled all diplomatic staff from their embassy in Washington, D.C., 4 members of the collective occupied the building until a protective power agreement could be implemented. Their actions also prevented U.S.-backed opposition forces from taking over the embassy. But on May 16th, the 4 activists were arrested under the argument that their refusal to leave interfered with the government's ability to protect the embassy. The UK government has deported 17 people to Jamaica this Tuesday, despite a court of appeal issuing an emergency judgment against it. On Monday night, the court restricted the removal of 50 men and women unless they were satisfied they had access to an attorney. Since last month, the detainees were prevented from contacting their lawyers due to problems with the O2 phone network at their detention centers. Many of the individuals scheduled to be deported have been in the UK since they were children, reignited Windrush protests. Lee Jasper of the Black Lawyers for Justice said the deportations were inhumane and an extension of the government's racist anti-immigrant policies.
There are some involved in very serious offences, but the vast majority are not. They are an individual whose last offence was for a small drug offence 17 years ago. There are people on that plane having been deported with their last criminal offence was 23 years ago. Why is it that this government has taken all of that time to determine their status? They've not proven to be a threat to the United Kingdom. They've not committed any further offences. And therefore, for all intents and purposes, having arrived here with their Windrush parents, they are indeed British citizens. These deportees had a court order preventing their deportation. And this government took those detainees from their detention centres at the dead of night. They were shackled from ankle to waist, and they were forced, some resisted and were beaten badly, onto coaches, transported over 300 miles away from London to a lonely airport, and sat on that bus knowing that the court had ruled in their favour, and this government did all of that to those detainees and their families while it sought an appeal against that court ruling. I think so. I think Trump and Boris Johnson share a lot in common. And one of them is this almost ideological commitment to identify people of colour, be they Nigerians, be they people from Jamaica, and to double down on them as being unpopular minorities so that they can prove their ideological credentials to people in the who would support an apartheid-like culture. We've got plenty of white Commonwealth individuals here in the United Kingdom, from New Zealand, from Australia, even South Africans, former South African, who have not been subject to this wholesale targeting and deportation. And yet we are asked to believe that this government is operating on the basis of the rule of law. No, that is a lie. What we're seeing is a government that is infected with the culture of racism that is brutally targeting people of Caribbean and African descent.
In other news, people in Buenos Aires, Argentina have marched to demand the government stop paying the massive debt to the International Monetary Fund. The protesters urge governments to prioritize food security and social services over paying the loan. The IMF debt, amounting to $44 billion, was acquired during the previous administration and led to a deep economic crisis. IMF representatives are due to arrive in the country this week to discuss a planned restructuring of the debt by current President Alberto Fernández. The right wing in Bolivia is doing all it can to prevent the country's biggest party, the Movement Towards Socialism, from returning to power in the May elections. It is trying to get the electoral authorities to rule Evo Morales and other leading candidates ineligible.
Bolivia's right is not satisfied with forcing the mass government to resign through the coup on November the 10th last year. It wants to wipe these leaders off the political map. And the most symbolic case is former President Evo Morales' candidacy for the Senate.
Those who have gone or tried to go to seek asylum and support in other countries are automatically excluded.
To stand for a seat in the Senate is outrageous. I am not going to prejudge what the Electoral Court will decide. We hope it will rule him ineligible. If it doesn't, we have time and we'll see what other legal mechanisms we can use.
The main mechanism now for politically annihilating the mass leaders is to get them ruled ineligible for the elections on May the 3rd, using the argument that they do not meet the 3- or 5-year residency requirements stipulated in the law.
By Wednesday, we will complete the documentation demanded. However, it seems strange to us that they have also demanded this of our candidate, Luis Arce, because we have checked and all the required documents were presented.
The Supreme Electoral Court has not yet approved the nomination of Evo Morales and 700 other candidates, and it's given them until midweek to deliver the documents it says are missing.
The Supreme Electoral Court will begin to analyze on Thursday the additional documentation delivered by the candidates not yet approved. This work will be completed on Monday when we will inform their parties.
However, it has been made clear that if these candidates meet the requirements and are approved, the door will remain open until a few days before the May the 3rd elections for others to challenge their nominations.
Candidates who are approved by the Electoral Court can still be challenged if some other party or political organization thinks there is reason to do so.
This is one way for the right, which is standing 7 candidates in these presidential elections, to remove the Movement for Socialism from the political scene. But through the de facto government, it is also pursuing legal cases against several of the candidates of the MAS, the party led by the former president Evo Morales.
After this short break, Youth Day is celebrated in Cameroon. We'll be back with more. Welcome back. More news at this hour. Thousands of residents have fled to the town of Mangina in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo after a rise in militia attacks over the past 3 days. The Ebola-hit town of some 72,000 people was left eerily empty as families migrated to nearby Beni. Residents say they fear the return of the Allied Democratic Forces, which carried out the deadly strike. Attacks by the ADF since last October have also hindered efforts to contain the Ebola virus.
The security situation is volatile. The killings in Mangina started the day before yesterday. ADF rebels raided Makusa, Ituri, the northern part of Mangina.
We are worried about the situation all of the time, and it seems to have no end. The government needs to come to our aid and help the other victims too in the face of these massacres, which have lasted for years. We've had enough.
Cameroonian youth marched in the streets of Yaoundé to mark the 54th National Youth Day as part of the African Union's Silence the Guns campaign. Hundreds rallied carrying banners denouncing the bloody conflict in Cameroon's Anglophone region, where thousands have died due to ethnic violence. The Silence the Guns campaign was adopted during this year's African Union Summit in Ethiopia. It seeks to make peace building a major priority for African states.
Silencing the guns basically means the reset of mindset in order for us to migrate from a continent that is full of conflict, so a conflict-free continent, and it begins with three things. One is ensuring that there's justice, two is ensuring that there is peace, and then three, ensuring that there is equality. So it's only through justice, peace, and equality we can be able to silence the guns, because these are the root causes of all conflicts in Africa.
Sudan's government has agreed to hand over former President Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court. He faces charges of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity over the conflict that broke out in the country's Darfur region in 2003, following a rebellion by non-Arab rebels. Government forces and mainly Arab militia mobilized to suppress the revolt were accused of widespread atrocities, including rape and mass killings. According to the United Nations, the conflict killed more than 300,000 people. This Tuesday marks the 30th anniversary of the release from prison of South African icon Nelson Mandela, after nearly 3 decades behind bars for fighting against the inhumane apartheid system. A series of events will take place across the country to commemorate the day that changed the course of history. President Cyril Ramaphosa has delivered a speech from the balcony of the Cape Town City Hall, where Mandela had addressed thousands of supporters in 1990 after attaining his freedom.
Into a new South Africa. Mandela was released was the day we all knew that apartheid was dead and it was finished and clear. The apartheid genie had definitely gone out of the bottle and could not be put back again.
Also in South Africa, the Economic Freedom Fighters Party has condemned the appointment of President Ramaphosa as chairperson of the African Union. A statement by the party said the decision is a missed opportunity to appoint a progressive leader who would lead the continent towards economic independence and unity. It notes that Ramaphosa's failure to protect African migrants from xenophobic attacks is evidence of his lack of commitment towards African unity. The EFF also accused Ramaphosa of being a loyal servant of imperialist forces looting Africa's resources. For the first time, Mali's president has made contact with Islamist extremists, a move the government has long rejected. The announcement comes as troops were dispatched to Kidal, a town that symbolizes the administration's lack of control over the country's north. The conflict has not only spread to central Mali, but to neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger. Mali has struggled to contain a violent revolt that broke out in 2012, killing thousands of military and civilians.
It is my duty and my mission to create all possible spaces and to do everything possible so that, by one means or the other, we can achieve some sort of peace, because the number of deaths in the Sahel today is becoming exponential, and I believe that it is time that certain avenues were explored.
Now we turn to Mexico, where the Attorney General has proposed new reforms that include the removal of femicides as a specific kind of crime. This, in turn, has caused outrage among feminist organizations.
This pink structure located in the middle of Mexico City is known as the Anti-Monument. It has become a meeting point for feminist groups to protest widespread violence against women.
They don't understand the pain of mothers who have lost their daughters. It's impossible to explain. They just don't understand it.
In their last meeting, they commemorated Fatima's death, which remains unpunished. She was 12 years old when 3 men tortured her, raped her, and killed her in the state of Mexico.
We will keep fighting for our daughters, for our mothers and sisters. We will do everything that's possible to bring this to an end, so there are no more deaths. We want all of us to be alive.
In this country, almost all femicides stand in impunity. According to the Attorney General, criminal law needs to be reformed so the public ministry can validate the crimes when they are motivated by gender.
If the public ministry has a specific capacity to resolve homicides, and if there is a vulnerable group, we need to work within our established parameters. We need to create laws that work within our abilities, not beyond them, because that does not help the victims.
However, feminist groups reject the proposal, considering that their years-long struggle will be discarded.
The reform seeks to diminish the importance of gender-based violence and to ignore the fact that femicides often end in impunity. This happens due to a lack of proper training and weak due process by certain institutions.
In the meantime, mobilizations are constant on the streets, demanding increased safety and an end to gender-based violence, as according to official numbers, femicides increased by 137% over the last 5 years.
Coming up, Iran celebrates the anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. More details after the break. Thank you for joining us again. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas told the UN Security Council on Tuesday that the world should reject President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan, calling it an outside imposition that cannot bring lasting peace. Abbas also said the deal makes Swiss cheese out of Palestine's territory and would severely limit Palestinian sovereignty.
I have come to you on behalf of the 13 million Palestinians to call for a just peace. That is all. I have come to you today, ladies and gentlemen, to reaffirm the Palestinian position that rejects the Israeli-US proposal. This plan will not bring peace or stability to the region, and therefore we will not accept it. We will confront its application on the ground. This is the summary of the project that was presented to us. This is the state that they will give us. It's like a Swiss cheese, really.
Ahead of President Abbas' address at the UN, thousands of Palestinian citizens protested in Ramallah, rejecting Trump's plan. They also demanded an end to the Israeli occupation of their lands and respect for Palestinian sovereignty.
We came here to support our political leadership, and we say to this unjust world, that Palestine, from its river to its sea, is ours. And we tell Trump, his son-in-law, and Netanyahu that we will stay, no matter how long or short.
Protesters have gathered outside the parliament in Lebanon in an attempt to block a vote of confidence in the new government. The demonstrators scuffled with police, who responded with tear gas and water cannon. Some lawmakers slept inside the parliament building as the protesters were out from early morning to try to prevent the session from taking place. They say they have no confidence in any of the political elite.
We are here because we are trying to get rid of the leaders of corruption, the leaders of war, the leaders of destruction, the leaders who ruined the country, who stole the country, who looted the country's wealth and left the people poor and humiliated.
Hundreds of thousands of Iranians are taking part in mass gatherings to mark the 41st anniversary of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Rallies have taken place in more than 5,000 locations across the country. Addressing crowds that converge in Tehran's Freedom Square, President Hassan Rouhani said the revolution remains strong and that attempts by the US and Israeli governments to destroy it will fail. This year's rallies coincided with the 40th day memorial for General Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated in a US drone strike in Baghdad in early January.
America can't do a damn thing through the sanctions. Even if we die from poverty and hunger, we will not compromise with America. No way. I'm telling this to officials, foreigners, and America.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has visited a community and a hospital in Beijing to inspect the effectiveness of measures implemented to halt the outbreak of the novel coronavirus, as the death toll rises to 1,017 in mainland China. President Xi met frontline medical staff at a hospital treating infected patients, calling the situation in Hubei province still very grave. He urged more decisive measures to contain the spread of the epidemic that has sickened over 42,000 people so far. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has said COVID-19 will be the new official name for the new coronavirus. The head of the WHO said the name had been chosen to avoid references to a specific geographical location or group of people in order to avoid stigmatization.
We now have a name for the disease, and it is COVID-19, and I will spell it COVID-19. CO stands for corona, as you know, VI stands for virus, D for disease, so COVID.
And with that, we end our news brief, but you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.